Very good Appalachians. Smart. Now there's a reason you guys are in here. So these are the western lands. So when I say western lands, I don't want you to think we're clear over here. We're actually, and you're right, Tristan, to a point, not maybe too north, but this area here becomes the western lands. Here are the colonies. Here's the Canadian area we kind of fought for and won. Here's Florida. But we still have the western lands right here. Does everybody kind of get that? So when I say the western lands, that's what I'm talking about. Now, the British actually acquired these western lands, that would be lands beyond the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, also as a result of the French and Indian War. But there wasn't a specific population or culture in those lands. Does that make sense? So the British government's now got to deal with these western lands. And these lands were acquired when they defeated the French in the French and Indian War. And who were still living in those areas? What culture? I shouldn't have said no culture. There is a culture living here. So the French are living in the Canadian area. The Spaniards are living in the Florida area. Who's living in the western lands? Native Americans. Or it's okay at this point to call them Indians. And we'll call African Americans Negroes later on because that was the term that was appropriate at that time. So Indians was something that lived, or were peoples that lived in the western lands. Now, how bad do you, I could talk to you about, I could teach a semester class, if not a year-long class, on Native American history, if I had to. So this is just the start of this whole Native American issue. What do you think these Native Americans think of the way the British are treating them in the western lands? They don't like it. They don't like it at all. Okay? The Indian tribes that still live there believe they're being treated unfairly, and as a result, the Indians made two demands upon the British. Pretty ballsy. They did it. Okay? So because they thought they were being treated poorly, the Indians that lived in the western lands gave two demands to the British. Two demands. They're going to say, we were treating us fairly, we want this and this. Okay? You can tell me a little later if you think the British really thought that was pretty good. First thing the Indians demanded, that Great Britain lower prices of goods that were traded with the tribes. That the British lowered the prices of the goods that were being traded with the Indians in the western lands. Do you think the British traded with the Indians in the western lands? Sure they did. And what were the Indians feeling?
Ripped off.
Ripped off. So they said, hey, these prices are too high. Are you nuts? I'm not paying this kind of money for that. And so they wanted the prices lowered. And do you think they probably were ripping them off? Jared? That explains that a little bit. A second demand that the Indians made upon the British is that the British supply the tribes with ammunition. They wanted ammunition. Delaney, my dear, what kind of ammunition would that be in the 1760s and 70s? What kind of weaponry did we have, you know? Muskets, single shooters, you know, they didn't have the repeating rifles and all that business, but they did use ammunition. Well, they had these new white man guns, so to speak, but had no what? Where'd they get the guns? Where'd they get them? Kind of. Where'd they get these guns that they have in the western lands? From the French and Indian War. Okay? But they didn't have any ammunition. And they wanted to be able to, you know, hunt, etc. So they demanded upon the British to give them ammunition. Now, what's sacred to Native Americans? Anybody into this a little bit? We'll talk about this really in detail. I'm going to take you to Fort Phil Kearny and Custer Battlefield and the whole thing this spring. But what is sacred to Native American tribes? Okay? Land is, well, they believe the land is a gift, so they didn't believe they owned any land, and we'll get to that. Okay? But what would be two things that would be really important to their survival? Animals. Their hunting grounds and their spiritual grounds. And we'll talk about both those later. Well, which of these do you think the Indians were paranoid that the British were going to come in and ruin? More. Their hunting grounds. Okay? So not only did they demand that they lower the prices of goods they traded with them, they also insisted they supply them with ammunition because they were afraid that these British were going to come across the Appalachian Mountains and invade their hunting grounds and take all of their hunting ability, and they didn't have a very good way. Was it easier to kill a deer with a musket or a bow and arrow? That's a tough question because actually the Native Americans were very good at the bow and arrow. But it is easier. And so they were concerned about that. Does that make sense? And so they wanted ammunition. Now, of the three issues, three demands, Ms. Wassam, which of the three, or all, or any, or whatever did they say yeah to? Say yes to. What are those, in your opinion, you know, you're a young girl, first 30 minutes of class here, you're a good thinker. What do you think of those three demands? What do you think they said yes to? It's not true or false. I mean, which ones? What's your gut tell you? What's your gut tell you? What's the next subtopic? Or what's the next what's the third? What is the third ID? What's it say? Third ID term. Right, this is an ID, these are IDs. What's your third one? What? No, that's like where you at? No, this is an ID, this is an ID, smaller ones. What's the third one on the list? 1, 2. What is that? Okay, I want to think about this. Okay, I'm asking you which of the three they agreed to. Okay, and you're all. Okay, what's Pontiac? What kind of name is that? Okay, what's a conspiracy? Yeah, so if we're going to have a conspiracy among the American Indians, how many did they agree to? Of those three demands. What? None. That's right, that a girl. None. Which made the Indians very resentful, right? They didn't do any of them. So, an Ottawa chief by the name of Pontiac gathered several Indian tribes together and is looking for some retaliation. Does this sound like the little bighorn when Sitting Bull got all these Indian tribes together? It makes sense. So, as Casey so proudly displayed, none. A little quiet today, we'll get her fired up. None of them. And so they got resentful. And so Ottawa, which was an Indian tribe, Ottawa Chief Pontiac gets several tribes together and is going to try to retaliate. Now, what would you do to retaliate? Now, this is a tough question. If we started 1600, man, you'd be popping these off. Casey would have gave me that answer in a minute if she kind of knew the setup. But how would you retaliate without getting yourself in too much trouble? I mean, you could certainly go over and kill every British person you saw, but that doesn't make any sense. So what might you do to get retaliation because they're not treating you very fairly? What might you do? If you don't kill somebody, you might do what? Yes. Kind of, and how would you mess with them? Well, we're not there. There's going to be some tea dumping later. But the Indians weren't involved. Now, the people that did it were dressed up as Indians. You're getting close. And close does count this class once in a while. Well, what do you think that the British have in the Western lands to protect their investment? Just like they got them all over the world. Well, they got to protect and keep an eye on what's going on there. Yes, what'd you say? Okay, what do soldiers stay in? Or forts. Okay, so what Pontiac and his followers did is they destroyed nearly all of the British forts that were built in the Western lands. So in retaliation for this poor treatment, they went to all the forts, nearly all of the forts in the Western lands, and they destroyed those forts. And the British had a name for this rotten action. And Michaela, what did they call Chief Pontiac and the Indians when they did this and wrecked their forts? What did they refer to that as?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do! Because it's right on your sheet.
Oh.
What did they refer to this bad action as?
Pontiac.
That a girl, so you know more than you think you do. Pontiac's conspiracy is how the British reacted to this horrible action on the part of these savages in the West. Pontiac's conspiracy ruined all of our forts, destroyed them all. And the British referred to this action on the part of Chief Pontiac and all of the Ottawa Indians that he got together that did that. They called that Pontiac's conspiracy. Okay, now, what disrupts when you're tearing down forts? What's it include?
Good.
What?
Good.
Well, what's it include, the V word? You don't tear down forts.
Violation.
Violence,
Violence.
there you go. Okay, so this violence happened and continued in the Western lands. And who has to make the rule or the policy? We better get this under control. Whose job is it to get this under control? Well, the king, kind of, it's be like saying the president, but really, if we had an uprising in America, the president would be involved, but who would be making the new policy? What? No. Who makes, okay, I'll give you an example. Mr. Smith makes the attendance rule. Who makes it policy? What? School board. Okay, so who's going to be responsible to put policy together to get this unrest and violence under control in the Western lands? Not the king, but the Parliament. Okay, that'd be like our Congress. Okay, so as violence continued in the Western lands, the British Parliament believed that they had to make some policy to get this thing under control. Now, who do they kind of have to go through, the British Parliament, to make sure they're kind of okay with this policy because it's going to affect them in the end? The colonists. Very good, Matt. That's great. So, the British government and the colonists would have to agree on what policy to apply in the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains, okay? Because it's going to affect the colonists, right? Because the British colonists are doing what with the Indians? Trading, those types of things. Do you think they got any common ground going there? Do you think the British government and the colonists could agree on a policy? They could not. Now here's what the colonists wanted the government to do, and see if you think it was reasonable, okay? So when Parliament got together with the colonists to try to get this problem solved, this is what the colonists wanted. Would the colonists want settlers moving to the Western lands? Would the colonists want settlers moving to the Western lands? Why, Olivia?
Because that's like their trading ground and that's where they get them.
Absolutely. That's why you're in this class. See, not a girl. Yeah, the colonists, first of all, they urged the government to keep settlers from moving to the Western lands. Where they want the people to stay? In the 13 colonies, right? They didn't want people moving to land west of the Appalachians because they were making good money west of the Appalachians in the fur trade. Okay? That's one thing the colonists urged, is to make a policy stating that settlers could not go to the Western lands. If they were what? Fur traders. Very good. Would the colonists want the government to open the Western lands to settlers that were farmers? Yes, why? Okay, and if you're a merchant in the colonies and you have someone west of the Appalachians that's a farmer, what are you going to do? You're going to buy that farmer's goods, are you not? And then what are you going to do when you get it back to your place? You're going to sell it for more money. Okay? They didn't want the fur traders going over there because whoever trapped those furs was going to make their own profit. Does that make sense? But if farmers go over there, farmers can't market that. Do they have time to grow the stuff and transport the stuff and get it to market and sell themselves? No. So they were all for that. So the colonists urged the government to keep settlers from moving to the western lands for profit or fur trade, but they didn't have any problem with the farming. Who are they forgetting about altogether on this deal? The Indians, right? So the conflicting claims come about. The Indians claim that that land is theirs, or really the land is a gift, no one's, but they're surely going to be there to use it. But nobody could own land, and that's the problem the Indians had. Now think about this. If you were an Indian who lived in the western lands your entire life, would you be appreciative of anybody coming over there to settle? No, because what's the rule at this time? You get the land if you're the first to settle it. Well, we don't care about the Indians. You know what I'm saying? And this is where this Native American problem, we're going to push Native Americans just west, 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 and finally we run out of land to push them, and then what do we want to do? What? Very good. Either we want to do, she's right, we want to do one of two things. We either want to put them on reservations because we pushed them so far there's no place to push them except in the ocean, and if we pushed them in the ocean, what would happen? What? Say it. Yeah, so really, when you get into the 1870s on Native American policy, the philosophy of the government was to put them on reservations or exterminate. That's what they thought, okay? So basically what happened is that the government gave an ultimatum, we're going ahead but it makes sense here, that if you don't go on the reservations by such and such a date, we're going to deem you hostile. And if you're hostile, we have the right to kill you. We have the right to come in and put you on those reservations by force. And if that happens, what are you going to have? Bloodshed, right? Little Bighorn's a perfect example of that, okay? So these Native Americans have been cheated the whole time. The point, that the reason this became a problem in governing their empire, especially in the colonies, is because do you think they ever got a solid policy taken care of in the West? No, and so what's that lead to? Mass confusion, disaster, and you can't control it. So they never did get a good control of the West. Does that make sense? So let's go back, since it's the first day, and make sure we understand a few things, okay? Dalton, tell me, who is the fellow that predicted the American Revolution 13 years before it happened? Count Verzane. And basically, in a nutshell, what was he saying? Guards, what was he saying? Yeah, it's really hard to hear when we got the air conditioner. What's that?
That they won't be able to like pay for their colonies and stuff. And be able to control.
Well, what is he saying though? What does Verzane say? JC, tell me one thing he's saying in that quote. Now, let's not be popping binders here. Okay, what is one thing he's saying? What's Verzane saying?
Saying that they're gonna have trouble controlling their colonies.
Why?
They're gonna want, they don't want to tax and stuff.
Well, we're too specific. He's saying that the American colonies no longer need England as much as they used to. They're not dependent upon it as much. And what's going to happen is England's going to come and ask for some revenue, and they're going to say, no, I'm not giving that revenue. I'm not going to contribute to the burden that you had put on yourself that has nothing to do with us, and we're going to want to be more independent, if not completely independent, right? He predicted that 13 years in advance. Okay, now give me an example, if you would, Lauren, of the need for new taxes. Very good. They were spending money defending the colonies they had already conquered. What else was a financial burden, Keisha?
They're cheaper for Florida and Canada.
Well, no, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
The need for new taxes. What was enough? Besides having to defend those colonies that they conquered, what's another reason they were so heavily in debt?
They need the money so they're going to be able to defend them.
Okay, that's what she said, but what cost them to start the defense?
The war.
The war. The 4 wars cost them many, many dollars. So they got in debt with the wars, and they continued in debt because they had to defend them. Now, to give you an idea of what wars cost, Pete, tell me what it cost in today's dollars to fight the French and Indian War. $22 billion. That's incredible. That's a lot of money. Okay? Now, what were the 2 reasons, who haven't I picked on here? I've picked on at least 2. At least what were the 2 reasons that the British leaders in Parliament thought the Americans ought to chip in? Why should they chip in for this debt? Why should we chip in? You're a loyal subject of the crown. That's one reason. You're a citizen. What's another reason you should chip in? What are they doing to the colonies? They're defending the colonies. Okay, so two reasons why they felt that the colonies should chip in is one, you have to, you're a loyal citizen, just like you have to pay taxes. And two, we're defending you from attack. You're going to pay. Okay? We talk about the second reason, the future of Florida and Canada. Explain just a little bit, if you would, Macklin, what we got out of the French Indian War. What did I shouldn't say we, what did the British get out of the French Indian victory?
They got more land.
Okay, where?
Like,
Two areas,
like
3 areas actually. Well, tell me what it was. What was it called?
the west lands.
Okay, they got the western lands, which are inhabited by.
Native.
Okay, what other lands they get, Ivan?
Canada,
Which was occupied by.
French,
Okay, and what's another one they got there, Elliot?
Spain.
Which, well, they didn't get Spain.
Florida was occupied by.
Very good. Okay, very good. We're getting it here. And what was the big problem in the western lands? Treating the Indians poorly. And trying to get that organized and trying to work with American colonists and British Parliament to find a policy in the western lands, which we never get figured out at this point, which you'll understand later when we start talking about more problems in the western lands. Okay? Now what's the new subtopic for tomorrow there, Taylor?
Weakness of British leaders, like the British Republic.
Okay, so you got all these problems, right? Governing your empire, and then on top of it, you've got what? Weak leaders that are screwing up time after time after time, and we're going to talk about that, the weakness of British leaders and why that's going to set the stage for trouble. And then we're going to get into colonial taxation without representation and talk about a bunch of acts that Congress passes, or Parliament passes, excuse me, to try to get revenue and how